Hi, David. How are you?
Hey, Brooks, I'm good.
This meeting is being recorded.
Let me just go live on YouTube.
So I guess that we had a little bit of resolution in Israel.
I guess, but we should definitely talk about that. And also, thanks for joining me, everyone. Charles Moscowitz here with Dooovid. Dooovid and I have been doing this program on Thursdays live at 1 p.m. We discuss often Judaism and its intersection with politics, with Israel, with culture. So, Dooovid, there's a new government in Israel now, headed by Naftali Bennett, who will be in there for 2 years, and then Lapid will be in there for 2 years. It kind of is similar to the National Unity government in Israel back in the 70s, when you had Perez and Shamir share a 4-year term, with Perez doing 2 and then Shamir doing 2. And it's one of these kind of compromises where a government was cobbled together and was able to obtain enough votes and enough seats in the Knesset to be in power. So they are in place now. Israel also has a new president. What do you see the situation as it stands now, and what do you think we should expect there?
Well, I mean, the biggest difference, obviously, is Bennett only having 5% of the vote. I think the coalition government, then the prime minister, there's no comparison ever that someone could be prime minister with only 5% of the vote, and it was obviously because of the vast pressure to get rid of Netanyahu, that's such a possibility. But I don't know, we could look it up, but how many seats Shamir or something has, but I think they had at least 15-20% of the electorate. But no, unfortunately, I'm not so confident. I think that you see that the most likely thing that's going to happen, and it could be instantly, could even be today. There's already problems coming today that we'll talk about with votes that have came across the Knesset, that everyone, that the polls, 80% of Israelis, maybe even 90%, predict that this government is going to collapse, and then we're going to be in the same situation we were before, but it's not going to be Netanyahu, it's going to be Naftali Bennett. And honestly, I think it's going to be a disaster. We talked about how he did in Lebanon, and I was just telling you, besides the UN and international court and Palestinians, that even Israel said that this guy was a loose cannon. This guy was out of control, and that was the Israeli report. And now he's our prime minister. I'm not an Israeli citizen, but people that really care and follow about Israel. And the most likely thing is the government is going to collapse, and we're going to be in the same situation with perpetual Bennett. And maybe they'll be able to eke out a budget before the government collapses, but I would not be surprised if the government collapses before they could even eke out a budget and survive, going on like this. I mean, you talk to Mordecai Kedar, and our visions for Israel as American citizens basically include, I'm going to call it the destruction, but the dismantling of the way the Israeli government is currently set up. So, I mean, even Charles, we have disagreements about what we would like to see in Israel. I think both of us largely agree that the current system probably has to be dismantled, and they need some sort of constitutional convention and new structure, government, if it's emirate or whatever system. But that's not on the table. That's just people like me and Charles, and even in Israel, people like Professor Kedar are a vast minority. And unfortunately, likely the only thing that will unify Israel again will be some sort of military threat. So I got to admit, I'm pretty, I wouldn't use the word scared, but I'm worried and pessimistic.
I don't really know the politics of Israel deeply. I mean, I should say that up front here. I've interviewed people over the years, including recently Mordecai Kedar, And my sense is that the government is going to go forward and it'll be fine. And I think he will be prime minister for 2 years, and that Lapid will be prime minister for 2 years, just like the Perez-Shamir arrangement. That, there's a way by which people's pasts can be forgiven once they're in power. I'm not saying forgiven, but there are various dynamics that take place where people want someone to be in power and what they represent, regardless. I mean, we could look at, for example, Biden. I mean, look, the guy has a racist, segregationist past, where he's used the N-word constantly and made vicious anti-black speeches in Congress, and was, and yet that's overlooked because the establishment and segments of them want him to be president, so they're willing to paper it over. And I think that the same dynamic.
But no one wanted Bennett. It was some sort of anomaly.
Yeah, but now that he's there,
completely different from Shamir. Like, Bennett is extremely unpopular. He didn't even make it into the Knesset the last election, and this time he only got 5%. And I told you the polls, only 11% of Israelis think that the coalition. You think that this coalition is going to last 2 years?
Yes.
Only 11% of Israelis agree with you.
Fine. Well, I think that at the same time,
all it takes is the Arab Party.
And the Arab Party is part of the coalition.
Any of these groups to back out, and there's going to be new elections, and that could be this week. If the Arab Party backs out, they'll have to call new elections next week.
I don't think the Israeli people want to go through it, and I think that they want to have some consistency. They want to have some sense of cohesion. They were able to get rid of Netanyahu. I think most people in Israel, quite honestly, were tired of him, regardless of the fact that I think he was a very successful prime minister. But, he's been in power off and on for 30 years. And I think that there is this desire to do something different and move forward. It's a zeitgeist. Again, in situations like that, often nuances of a person's past and whatnot are just overlooked. Let's put it that way. In the interest, not because they particularly like him.
Politicians in Israel. He only got 5% of the vote.
Fine, but the point is he's there, and he
not
is.
Like Shamir or Lapid, that's very popular, at least among.
But the problem, the issue,
hundreds of thousands of Israelis.
Dooovid, I mean, the way politics works, I understand he's not popular, but the difference is that it's not about him. It's that the way politics works as such, the people of Israel want to have some sense of stability and cohesion. I don't think they want to go through another election, given the fact that there's been already 4, I think, in the past couple of years. And people want to see some sense of stability. And so I do think that for that reason, it's not because anyone particularly likes him, but it's because they want to see a government move forward, and I think it will move forward. And the fact that he is going to be there for only 2 years is at least somewhat of a safety valve in terms of people willing to go along with it in the interest of national cohesion. At least, who knows? We'll have to see what happens. But that's my sense of it. Unless he really steps in it and does something so ridiculous or outrageous. And I don't think that's going to happen. The coalition is between Bennett and the more left party than generally, which is Lapid, and they have the promise of getting in there in 2 years, which I think they value, and the Arab Party, which is their ally. So I think that it's going. I think it's going to hold.
When you're ready, and why the coalition might collapse today, and it's related to something that we've talked about on the show before, the family reunification law that bans Palestinians and infiltrators who marry Israelis from earning Israeli citizenship. That currently there's a law in Israel called the family reunification law that if you're a Palestinian and you marry an Israeli, which generally is a path to citizenship, only Palestinians are barred from this path to citizenship, and the Palestinian Ram group has refused to back it. And
wait, let me just get some clarity. That's interesting. Let's get some clarity on that law. So let's say you're a Christian and you marry an Israeli, an American Christian.
Only Palestinians are.
All right. So then, if you're an American,
anybody in the world besides a Palestinian who marries a Jew could get Israeli citizenship
without converting to Judaism.
Yeah, just through
through marriage. So if you're an American,
there's a specific law called the Family Reunification Law that bars that has to be renewed every year, and it needs to be renewed. And the Rom coalition said they're not going to vote for it.
Okay.
And if Rom backed out of the coalition over this, or if the right wing wanted the government to collapse, the government could collapse today, and there would be new elections.
And that the right wing
coalition.
I understand. So
once the coalition collapses,
well, I'm just trying to understand this issue.
Bennett.
So then the right wing wants to see this law continue, which is that specifically Palestinians are singled out, not like other groups, not a Christian. If an Israeli marries a Christian or a European or a Frenchman or a German, that person automatically becomes a citizen of Israel if they emigrate to Israel.
Was eligible, not necessarily. Yeah, but
okay.
Palestinians, it's forbidden.
Whereas if you're a Palestinian and you marry an Israeli, you don't become a citizen. Is that it?
It's impossible to. I mean, it's
unless you convert to Judaism, I suppose.
I told you the law. You can't even convert to Judaism.
No, I looked into that. That's not a law. It's
but
just
the family reunification does know that a Palestinian who marries an Israeli and then converts to Judaism is still barred from becoming an Israeli citizen. That's my understanding. It was debated in the Knesset today. You could look it up.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's a hot issue. Israel's very careful about.
It could be the right wing wants the government to collapse. Because say Lapid. It's Lapid's coalition with the agreement that Bennett is just the first prime minister in a rotation. So the right wing probably wants the government to collapse and would prefer perpetual Bennett in new elections.
Yeah, but they're not going to get Bennett in new elections. He only has 5% popularity.
But it doesn't
now
matter.
they have
if
Bennett for 2 years.
Elections, Bennett will be prime minister until a new coalition is formed. And so just like Netanyahu, there were 4 elections and they couldn't form a coalition, and Netanyahu remained prime minister. So
that doesn't make sense politically,
apart, Bennett will remain
until they form another coalition, in which case it'll be the same if they're lucky.
Apart, they'll call new elections.
Yeah, in which case
until that stops,
I understand, but
Bennett will be perpetual.
Dooovid, it doesn't. What you're saying, I mean, look, it doesn't make sense politically. Maybe it'll happen, but they have Bennett in there for 2 years. We're talking about the right, and if the right conspires to destabilize the government or for new elections, Bennett ain't going to be any more popular, and he might get in for another 2-year arrangement. They're not going to gain anything. He's not going to win a popular vote if he's as unpopular as you say he is.
It won't matter. You won't be able to get rid of him besides a new coalition. So Bennett, even though he only had 5% of the vote, through default will become perpetual prime minister till a new coalition through election.
Well, which would happen probably pretty quickly. I mean, right now he's prime minister.
Very unlikely. I mean, you saw how hard it was to get rid of Netanyahu.
Yeah, but right now they have him there for 2 years. A new election isn't going to take 2 years. It's going to take probably a few months, and then they'll be back to square one. They'll be lucky if he's in at all. I just don't. I don't.
The same thing. That there is no path forward in Israel.
Period. And Netanyahu is a little different. He's been in there. He's the head of a major party.
In order to get rid of Bennett, so it will be like anybody but
Bibi.
It'll become anybody but Bennett, and the coalition will require people that don't agree with each other forming a coalition for the specific purpose of getting rid of Bennett.
They already did that to get rid of Netanyahu. Look, you and I don't know what will happen, but I don't think at the end of the day that makes sense politically for anybody, left, right, or center.
That's why I'm so worried. I mean, you have faith that somehow this coalition government's going to last for 2 years. I told you only 11% of Israelis agree with you.
We'll see. I mean, I don't know which percent. I don't know what poll you're looking at, but I think most Israelis don't want to see another continuation of this instability with constant elections. For the interests of the nation. That's why the Perez Shamir government worked, because people were tired of that. I mean, there was some similar dynamic back then. I know that they were both heads of major parties, and Bennett isn't, but nevertheless, there was a sense, especially after the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, that they wanted to have stability, so they had a national unity government. I mean, Ben-Gurion had a national unity government for a while.
Well, that's what Professor Kadar is saying. There is no stability, and it's kind of what me and you are agreeing upon within the current framework of the Israeli government.
You mean within the parliamentary system?
There is no possibility.
Well, okay. I mean,
stability.
I suppose Israel should.
I mean, they don't even have a constitution, but they actually need some sort of constitutional convention to completely rework the political system. And within the current system, there is no possibility of stability. That's my
well.
opinion.
I mean, look. I mean, you're talking about they have a parliamentary system modeled after the British parliamentary system. I
just
personally,
one house instead of two.
Well, that's right. They don't have a House of Lords, but they do have a ceremonial president. I don't. I mean, I tend to agree that, I mean, in a way, the American system is a better system with a strong president executive balanced by two other branches of government and the existence of states. But, it depends. Most countries in the world, I think, have more of a British style parliamentary system, not just Israel. I mean, that's kind of the standard system in most European countries. And probably,
unfortunately, Israel doesn't have a constitution. Like if it's Jordan,
most countries
Arab
don't.
Countries that are constitutional monarchies.
No, most countries don't have constitutions. Britain doesn't have a constitution.
Israel's supposed to have a constitution. Like when they did the basic laws, it was under the provision that eventually they would form a constitution. And
Dooovid, most countries in the world don't have.
Let's make a constitution. But so that's what I'd be proposing and saying, yes, the system that Israel's operating under was supposed to be a temporary system till they developed a constitution. And
fine. Most countries in the world, they probably should, but most countries in the world don't have a constitution. Great Britain doesn't have a constitution. Canada doesn't have a constitution.
Israel was supposed to have when they made the basic laws,
and they haven't gone around for it. They probably should
create a constitution, and they never accomplished that.
All right, fair enough. What else is new? What's happening in Michigan with anti-Semitism and with the, we can't talk about the election, of course, but what's going on in the Jewish world?
I mean, they actually boycotted the Zim shipping. I think they did in Oakland, California, and New York. So that the protest, University of Michigan is pressure, but I don't think there's been.
Are you talking about BDS?
I was saying there's a company called ZIM that is Israeli International Shipping, and in Oakland, California, they actually blocked the ports and convinced the union not to unload it, and they had protests in New York that also had such problems. So they just have an office here, and like 75 people went outside and protested for an hour. But like in my area, there hasn't really been noticeable increase in anti-Semitism besides in the universities and the public statements. In terms of the violence, Hashi Titzler, I think he got assaulted
he was
by Palestinians. Hopefully, he'll be able to have him back. We'll see city council elections coming up. We'll see. Maybe he wins the Democratic nominee and ends up coming on to city council. But like LA, I think violence amongst the Jews is increasing in some areas. It hasn't been the case here in Metro Detroit. And I think it's unlikely the dynamics that there would be that kind of violence against Jews in Detroit. So it's more just a question politically. Andy Levin, our local congressman, decided to back Ilhan Omar in her statement. They had the Jewish congressmen that stood up and wanted Ilhan Omar to clarify her statement about comparing Israel to Hamas and ISIS. And Andy Levin agreed with her that these forcing her to clarify is essentially racist and Islamophobia, that even if you disagree with her, this can force you to clarify. And now he is being stop anti-Semitism. And saying, God forbid, they're going to call Andy Levin, Carl Levin's son, Senator Levin's nephew, an anti-Semite over defending Ilhan Omar. And but in terms of that's more political, so like the 1.2 billion, the 1.2 billion package for Israel, or various things. Andy Levin has a vote, and that vote might make a difference. So there's a lot of pressure about that in universities that have BDS resolutions, or just the general status of how high should we hold our head as a Jew. But honestly, I'm not that concerned about rising anti-Semitism. As far as I know, I haven't heard of any Jews being beat up in Metro Detroit. I haven't heard of people's businesses losing their jobs or various things, and I'm not expecting that.
It tends to come in waves, usually when Israel is in the news in terms of defending itself against in a war, like it did about a month ago, when there's another attempt at genocide in Israel. You get all the vicious haters from both the left and the right, and it's more left than right these days, crawl out from under the woodwork and start to agitate against Israel and against Jews. And then once it's over, they go back underground. And I think that's what's happened. That hasn't changed. I remember that phenomena back in the day. I mean, it is, going back in the 70s, Israel's at war, you get them all come out. And it's the same general unholy coalition between Israel's open enemies like Hamas or an Arab country coalesced with leftists around the world. You do have right now great criticism against your good friend, your Congresswoman Tlaib and Omar and the so-called squad for...
So Andy Levin, from one of the most famous Jewish families, been like 100 years in Michigan. Dominic Carl Levin was one of the most senior ranking senators. His uncle is disagreeing with you, and he's stepping out.
So he's stepping out to support boycotting Israel?
Omar and Tlaib.
Why? Does he want to boycott Israel? I mean, is he supporting Hamas?
Probably wants to boycott Israel, but
what does he support them for? Because they're a leftist? I mean,
probably because he supports a multicultural immigrant America and feels that defending.
What does it have to do with being a self-hating Jew? I mean, if he supports
or dark-skinned,
if he supports multicultural America, he might support his own people. I mean, there's nothing that doesn't support other ethnic groups.
He is voicing the opinion of the of Jews in this area. So, like you, as someone that's interested in advocating for Israel, so the
majority of Jews in Detroit are anti-Israel?
In his district, or the non-Jews who live in his district, and if advocating for Israel goes against that, where his uncle Carl Levin obviously was probably did more for Israel.
Sure,
he was the head of, I think, the Ways and Means.
He was.
Most of the money that went through to Israel was done through Carl Levin.
It was, and now the nephew's gone bad.
You're going to say he went bad.
I am going to say that.
That's your opinion.
Yes, it is.
Someone who cares about Israel.
And the Jewish people. Yeah. Now, but you're telling me, Dooovid, that
you're the guy who lost to Barney Frank.
So what?
Barney Frank.
Barney Frank was pro-Israel. We didn't disagree on that. Now,
if he was in office today, he would probably be similar.
No, I don't think so. I think Barney Frank is the son. No, I disagree. Barney Frank is a good Zionist.
If he was decades younger,
no, I don't think so. I disagree. He would be a Zionist because a lot of people on the left are. Levin and apparently a lot of people in Greater Detroit.
We didn't talk about, but the Democrats.
Let's talk about that. Now, you're saying that the most Jews in Greater Detroit are anti-Israel now? I mean, is that what you're saying?
No, they're not anti-Israel. They're just not pro-Israel. They don't care. They're
to the point where they're going to support.
Andy Levin supports Israel. I'm not saying that they want to be anti-Israel, but they don't.
Well, if they support Tlaib, they're anti-Israel in the de facto sense.
You're going to say not being pro-Israel is being.
No, I'm saying that if they're supporting Tlaib,
it's not that they're anti-Israel.
They may not be actively anti-Israel in an overt sense, but if they're supporting a Jew hater and an anti-Israel activist like Tlaib, they're anti-Israel in the de facto sense. Yes.
No, I mean that's just your rhetoric. They're saying they're supporting Omar because they feel like maybe people like you are picking on her because she's Muslim and has dark skin. And even
that's
if she
a lie.
Is anti-Israel,
that's absolutely a vicious, hateful, blood libelous lie. Nobody's picking on anybody because of their skin color. Nobody's picking on someone because they're Muslims. They're picking on someone because they have a genocidal attitude toward the state of Israel. They want to see every Jewish man, woman, and child in Israel murdered. That's why they're picking on her. Not because she's Muslim. There are plenty of Muslims in this country who do not support her position, I'm sure. There's nothing to do with her religion.
Andy Levin would stand up to you to protect Ilhan Omar.
And he's protecting a Jew-hating person who advocates. It's not my opinion.
To protect her against people like you.
It's not my opinion. It's her public policies, not her religion.
People like you.
Against me because I'm calling out somebody who has public policies that hate Jews and Israel. It has nothing to do with Muslims.
I know Andy Levin's like Andy Levin's standing up to you. The reason
he's because he's a Jew, a self-hating Jew.
To people like you.
Because he's a self-hating Jew.
You could claim your reason for his intention, but he's saying like no.
He's going to accuse me
picking on her
because I don't like her for her skin color. Vicious lie
against you.
Yeah, he's going to claim that because I don't goose step to the left and zig heil to her points of view, I have something against Muslims, or I don't like somebody because of their skin color. That is a vicious goddamn lie. And he is sick if he thinks that. That is a sickness.
Inner Jewish balance, where you and Andy Levin are getting in a fight over your opinion about Ilhan Omar.
My opinion about Ilhan Omar is based on her policies. Yeah, but he stands up for her policies. My opinion against her is because of her policies, not because of her ethnic background. I couldn't care less about her ethnic background.
Irrelevant. I think like she'll get one vote on whether to give more money to Israel or not, but like what she thinks about Israel is basically
it's very relevant. No,
like
it's very relevant because she
it's get one vote in whether
no. It's very Dooovid. It's very relevant because she combined with Tlaib and my own congresswoman here in Boston, Ayanna Pressley, and others are basically taking over the Democratic Party. So it is every bit relevant.
Yeah, but it's like most people in this area that are voting in these elections don't really care about U.S. policy in Israel, and saying as a U.S. congressperson,
but when you support people like
Israel, there's only really one vote that they're going to get that's going to make a difference on Israel, and that's going to be the funding. So if Ilhan Omar and your congresswoman vote against funding for Israel, maybe Andy Levin votes for it, maybe he votes against it.
If he's supporting people who want to cut aid to Israel,
and constituents.
No, if he is supporting a congressperson who wants to cut aid to Israel, and one who is combined with others who are likewise of that opinion, and who are really taking over to a certain degree, I would argue, the Democratic Party, including the existing administration, then he's supporting the destruction of Israel, and I would argue, a self-hating Jew. It has nothing to do with Omar's ethnic background. I couldn't care less about her ethnic background. And for you to suggest, or for him to suggest, that I have something against anyone because of that is a vicious lie and a piece of agitprop communist propaganda, I might add. This is and by the way, now that we're on the subject, this whole business of Attorney General Merrick Garland coming out and saying the biggest problem facing this country right now is white supremacy. What is he really saying? He's saying anybody who supported Trump, that's what he's saying. The white supremacy is there. It's always been there. It's not, I don't think it's any more now than it's ever been. And it's something that's been condemned by everybody. It's a fringe thing. But for him to trot that out at a time like this and ask people to turn in their relatives if they think they might, not have an opinion or something, that's what they did in Nazi Germany. This is vicious, this is ugly, and it's anti-American. It's nothing to do with, there isn't a major, white supremacy is always a problem, but it's way down the list in terms of the real problems this country is facing right now. And it does not describe most Trump supporters. In fact, I would suggest in a converse way that the more supremacist attitude is found in the so-called critical race theory, who are focused on this obsessive identification of people based on race and ripping people apart and dividing the country up. That's the problem if you want to take a look at race problems. So not some fringe nuts under a rock somewhere who are part of some weird white supremacist cult. We understand who they are and they should be looked at, but that's not mainstream. That's not suddenly becoming like, he acts like this is some crisis that, needs the whole country needs to mobilize. This is how so?
So I mean, because Andy Levin, congressman in the district right now that's adjacent to where most Jews live. That most Jews, Andy Levin represents not too many Jews. The majority of the Jews live in Haley Stevens' district, who ran against my friend Epstein, who was the coordinator of Trump for Michigan as a
Okay,
Republican,
fine.
and the Jewish community in
It tends to be
this
liberal,
area.
but it's not
Well, let me just
anti-Israel.
finish and lay out the politics. So the Jewish
Sure.
community here in Metro Detroit unequivocally opposed Lena Epstein in favor of Haley Stevens. So
Okay, fine. Is
but
Haley
there's
Stevens
gonna be
anti-Israel?
Let me finish. I'm
Sure.
explaining something. So there's going to be redistricting because there was elections, and so it looks like they're going to redistrict the districts. And so Andy Levin, should he run again, will be in primary against Haley Stevens and will no longer be representing the area that doesn't have too many Jews and is multicultural, democratic, but he will now have to run directly against Haley Stevens in the area where tens of thousands of Jews in Metro Detroit live. And yes, extremely likely that the organized Jewish community will agree with Charles and will back Haley Stevens.
Yeah, because she's
over
pro-Israel.
Andy Levin
Thank
in
you. And
the
they should.
Democratic primary over Israel. But currently, right now,
Thank God.
Andy Levin is in the district where there aren't too many Jews, and no one in his district really cares that much about the issues.
Apparently he does.
Well, I don't think I'm not saying he is in a multicultural area. He represents like the UAE and unions and a lot of African Americans and Arabs, and he probably does politically. It's good for him to stand up for Ilhan Omar. It's like no, like these are unfound, unfair attacks, but because of the redistricting in the next election, he will be in the Democratic primary within the Jewish district. Whoever wins to become the Congress area here will majority agree with Charles.
Good.
And will
I hope
likely
so.
back Haley
I hope he
Stevens
tanks. I'll do what I
over
can to
Levin,
help
but
that happen.
We'll see next year.
Yeah, I hope he tanks.
Yeah, I mean, they'll be next year, and it's interesting.
And it sounds like Haley
just
Stevens.
like Ilhan Omar. I mean, just like Rashida Tlaib. There's only like 1% of like in Haley Stevens, like 15% of the electorate is Jewish. In Rashida Tlaib's area, like 1% of the electorate. Maybe in Andy Levin's 3% of the electorate is Jewish, and so it's
well, that's heartening. It's heartening to know that Greater Detroit's Jews are not.
I don't know if the same thing is happening in your area also.
I think that the majority in my area of Boston, just like
similar in your area.
No, I think that it's safe to say that in my area of Boston, just like Greater Detroit, the majority of Jews remain pro-Israel, even if they're liberal. It doesn't matter. Liberal, conservative, they're pro-Israel. And it sounds to me like Haley Stevens, who's not Jewish.
But Presley's your congresswoman, anyways.
Well, my congresswoman, Presley is my congresswoman, but she represents, I mean, I live in the city of Boston. I don't live in the Jewish neighborhood.
What percent of the electorate? So you're saying Presley is not the congresswoman of the district that includes the majority of Jews?
Yes, they do not include the majority of Jews. That's right.
And if she was in the area that included the majority,
she probably would not be elected with her positions. That's right.
So that's why the redistricting makes a big deal in this area, and that's why I compared. Like, I don't know if you're going through redistricting there, and if they
not really
redistricting to overlap Presley's area with the major Jewish community. Than the Jewish, but in the area you live, the Jewish community probably has close to no power within the Democratic primary process to get rid of her, just like here in Michigan, that the Jewish community has basically no power to defeat Tlaib in an election.
That's right. Same dynamic. You're absolutely right, Dooovid. And I mean, just again, it sounds to me like, just to reiterate here, the Jewish community of Boston, just like the Jewish community of Detroit, which is liberal, is predominantly, and I would even suggest largely, overwhelmingly pro-Israel, and that it sounds like Haley Stevens, who's not Jewish, is pro-Israel and is supported
all the way.
Yeah, and is supported by the Jewish community for that reason, among others. And she's probably liberal too, which is fine. But the point is that this guy Levin is not in the mainstream of Judaism. He is siding with anti-Jewish and anti-Israel clique because they are taking over.
My mother was partners at the same law firm, and she's retired. But when Carl Levin retired, he became a partner.
And his uncle was
Carl Levin is about as mainstream
he was.
Judaism as you could get.
He was, and he was a good American. He was a very
this guy, his son, now all of a sudden isn't in the mainstream.
Yeah, I guess not. I mean, from what you're describing,
movement, where it's saying like, no, I mean, he was what was.
Well, then he obviously went bad at some point, because it sounds like from what you're describing,
saying that it was
he's gone way out on the left.
It's just the natural trend of people like him that
probably
Democratic,
spoiled, silver spoon in his mouth, rich, suburban. The classic profile of people like AOC and other people who, it is a classic profile. Probably has never produced anything in his life.
Most of his friends that he was Jewish. He somewhat integrated, had a lot of African American friends. Things like the union, the Jewish issues were more about supporting.
I don't think that most
Dooovid,
I don't think that most
integration.
I don't think most African Americans.
For Carl Levin, he's still following like the UAE
Fine.
integration.
Well, in those issues,
policy,
he's fine.
It's only Israel that.
It's not just Israel, and I also don't think that most African Americans are probably. Can I speak, please? I don't think that most African Americans are anti-Israel. I don't think that.
He got into office basically off the UAE.
And he's pro-union, which is fine. I was a member of a union. That's perfect. I have no problem with that. I just wonder if his anti-Israel thing is probably not because he thinks it's going to make it.
He's not anti-Israel. He's just not.
He's supporting anti-Israel people who want to cut aid to Israel. That's anti-Israel.
He's just
yes, he is.
Against people like you. Me and you were.
He is supporting. I don't want to get on this merry-go-round again. It's nothing to do with their Dooovid, I don't want to get on this merry-go-round with you again. We went over this. We don't agree. Yes, I am. Yes, I do. Yes, no. I don't want to go back on this.
I don't like the way you're talking about Ilhan Omar.
It's because if he look, Dooovid, you know what? I don't want to go back in this merry-go-round with you. We've gone over it. I will do it briefly, and then we're going to change the subject, okay? My opposition to Ilhan Omar is not because of her ethnic background. If he thinks it is, it's a damn lie. It's a blood libel, and it's vicious. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with her public policies, which are anti-Israel, and that if he thinks criticizing Ilhan Omar is because of her ethnic background, he's demented. It has nothing to do with that. That's an attack on Jews. It has to do with her anti-Jewish and anti-Israel attitudes, period. Nothing to do with her background. And certainly most African Americans, I would even think a pretty good percentage of Arabs are not anti-Israel. And I don't think that's why he is siding with her. I don't think he's siding with her even.
Anti-Israel.
Anti-Israel. And I don't think he's siding with her.
That, but saying like, no, he's not anti-Israel.
He's de facto anti-Israel if he's siding with them.
No,
and I think, yes, he is.
It's like he just is standing up for her. He's not standing up for her opinions on Israel.
He's anti-Israel because of her policies, which are anti-Israel.
But it's like, even if you're right about what she thinks about Israel, he's saying, yes, as a Jew, I will stand up for her against you because she has a right to be anti-Israel, even if
she has a right to be anti-Israel, but that doesn't mean you support her. She has a right to be anti-Israel. Look, if Adolf Hitler was elected in her district, he has a right to serve because he's elected. That doesn't mean I'm going to support them, and he is.
But, I mean,
and that's what I'm talking about.
Policies, besides for her positions on Israel,
has he said anything about her position on Israel?
Unions. He came to power on a progressive platform.
But has he said anything about her present controversy in Congress about her statements about Israel and her comparing Israel to the Taliban? Has he criticized that? Has he come out publicly and talked about the fact that Ilhan Omar said that the Holocaust makes her feel all warm and fuzzy? Did he criticize that?
No.
All right. He's anti-Israel. Thank you. Let's move on to another subject.
Pro-Israel. Why you say because he's refusing to attack her?
De facto, he's anti-Israel. Maybe I don't know what.
If I walk down the street and I see someone beating up a Palestinian who's an anti-Israeli activist, God forbid, and I stop the person from beating up the Palestinian, does that make me anti-Israel?
No. But if that same Palestinian,
is that what he's doing with
but by supporting her public policy, it does. He's not. I mean, personally, I don't want a hair in her head damaged. I mean, I would defend her as a person.
Yeah,
But her
I'm saying-
public
but her opinions
policies,
on
I
Israel mean
condemn.
very little
And I
for
defend her
public
right to
policy, because
serve.
on 90% of other issues, he's in the same progressive camp. I mean, they're both basically union-backed candidates.
Yeah, but this one issue, he obviously is a little fuzzy
But
on,
the
and he
unions
hasn't
are way
said
more
anything.
important than
And there are
Israel.
plenty of other pro-union people who are pro-Israel also. Most of the unions are pro-Israel. I would ask the unions what their position is on this.
Yeah,
you
but
know.
just to demand that he turn against Omar because her position on
Yes, I do
Israel
demand it.
doesn't mean that he agrees with her position on Israel.
He should come out and vigorously condemn her recent
Why should he do
statements.
that?
Because
You say
he's
an anti-Semite,
because
anti-Israel,
otherwise
unless he
he's
condemns-
leaving the
unless
impression that he
you're an
supports them.
anti-Semite if you don't condemn anti-Semites. I'm sorry.
He is
Says the man who
actively
talks with
supporting
Michael
her,
Jones and Richard
Dooovid.
Spencer.
You
Says the man
said,
who talks with Richard Spencer.
yeah, and
Michael
condemned him
Jones.
vigorously. You are saying that he actively supports her and he has endorsed her
Supports her as a person.
as a
in
politician.
attack.
He has supported
And
her
as a person who
candidacy.
has a progressive agenda.
Yeah,
that
thank
is
you. He has
90% in line
supported
with his
her.
agenda.
He has supported her as a politician, and
Because
he should
90%
answer
of their
to that.
agendas, progressives are the same.
But he has to come out with that 10% and condemn it, or else
Why does he have to?
he doesn't have to.
I mean, you're
But
calling upon
if he
him
has
as a
any
Jew.
kind of
You're saying
conscience,
he's a
he
bad
should.
Jew unless he does that. Or you're saying he's anti-Israel unless he does it.
Yes, I am. And if he has any conscience, he would do that because she and her ilk, not just her, but her crowd, her squad, as they call it, are anti-Israel, and they are wielding considerable influence in the Democratic Party. And yeah, he should come out. He can agree with her on other issues. But, I mean, the fact that this is a big one.
But she's going to.
I could agree with Adolf
She's
Hitler
gonna
in
say,
some
"This guy
issues, I
Charles is
suppose.
attacking me. How are we going to work together on the unions and police reform if you don't defend me against Charles?"
I don't know what you mean by that, but I just
If Ilhan Omar says the same logic that you're saying is like, these guys, they're calling, that they're accusing me of being anti-Semite. You know me. I'm not an anti-Semite. I need you to defend me. So that's what Andy Levin is doing.
He needs to open.
Ilhan
He
Omar
obviously needs to
wants
take
work
the.
together on a various amounts of issues.
He needs to take.
She needs Jews to come out and support her, and so Andy Levin stepped forward and say, "I will stand up for."
And he should have done it in the context that he does not agree with and condemns her Israel policies, and he didn't do that, did he?
Well, no. I'm saying I'm not. I'm not his daddy. I'm not defending him.
It's a political question. If you're going to support a candidate for office, and they take a position that you disagree with, you have to put that out there and make that known that you don't support that particular thing. You don't just goose step along and say, "Oh, I support this person," and you don't lie and say that anyone that disagrees with me has something against her ethnic background, which is a lie.
Charles is the liar.
That I have something against her ethnic background.
He knows the woman.
You started this conversation, Dooovid, by saying that he's defending her because he thinks people have something against her ethnic background. And you also said
he's from one of the most famous Jewish families in all of America,
which gives him a lot of weight.
Standing up and saying she's not an anti-Semite.
And you also said that she feels that she's being attacked because of her ethnic background by Jews, which is a terrible slander.
That people like you demanding that she clarify is essentially Islamophobia.
It's not that she demands. She has clarified her position.
Demanding this stuff is basically
first of all,
she's black and Muslim, and that's what.
That's a vicious lie.
But that's what Andy Levin
and he is dead wrong, and that is a blood libel against Jews.
Attacking her because she's Muslim.
That's
and
lie.
Black, and that's why he's standing up to defend her. And says,
that's
no, this woman is not an
vicious
anti-Semite. He knows her.
That's divisive, and it's a vicious lie. And she has made her position quite clearly known about Israel, and even to a degree about Jews, I may add. And he has, the fact that he's going to shift this conversation and say,
like, he's a Jew from one of the most prominent Jewish families in all of
America, and
he's
disgracing that family.
Standing up and saying Charles is wrong.
He is disgracing the legacy of his own family by not publicly saying, "Look, I support
his father, who thank God is still his uncle, who's still alive. His father passed away.
And what does his uncle say?
I don't know if he's made a comment on it.
I know. I wonder. I'd like to know. Maybe somebody should interview
Carl
him.
Levin agrees with you.
I bet you he doesn't agree.
The legacy of his own family.
Yeah, I bet you he doesn't think it's so
well,
wonderful.
you bet you don't speak on behalf of him.
Fine, don't you either.
Is it your right to say he's disgracing?
Yes, it is my right to say it. He is.
His family's right to say. If Carl Levin's alive, is it his right to say whether his nephew?
Let him come out and say it if he wants. I'm not going to
to
hold it against him if he doesn't, because we're talking family here. So maybe he doesn't want to. Fine. But I am not related to these people, and I can make my opinion known. He is not condemning. He is not condemning, an agenda that seeks to destroy the state of Israel. It speaks for itself. She says that. Doesn't mean that she's personally an anti-Semite, even though I think she is. But either way, her actions, her advocacy is de facto anti-Israel, and as such, I would argue, anti-Semitic. And the fact that he doesn't want to come out and condemn that, and then he phrases it that we have something against her because of her ethnic background. Not only is he a coward for not coming out and criticizing her publicly for that, assuming he's also not anti-Israel, which I don't, but to add that smear on top of it is really a disgrace, and it's vicious. Let's talk about something else, Dooovid. What else is going on?
The COVID-19's a big issue. Like Michigan, we had the lowest case count in over a year, only like 150 cases. Restrictions are about to be completely removed. There might be flare-ups or variants, and so it's going to be interesting what happens.
What is happening on the street out there? I mean, are people taking off the mask? Have you gone out? I mean, are people going into restaurants again? I mean, what's going on?
Yeah, so restaurants are reopening. I think you could even go indoors now. The local synagogues now have went back. I'm not sure if they got rid of social distancing, but you could now go into almost all of the local Orthodox, modern Orthodox synagogues without a mask and without, I think even without social distancing requirements as per the.
But you've been out on the street. Are people doing it? I mean, are people going into the restaurants now without the mask? Are they walking around? How many masks do you see now?
I was with President Trump, and I was disappointed in President Trump when he didn't follow through. That I was hoping social distancing would last after COVID-19, but
I'm asking what's going on the street.
There's a lot of stores that still have policies that masks are required. Now the government does not require stores to have mask requirement policies, but generally the majority of stores do still have mask requirements, and people maybe like on the street, maybe like 25% of people are still wearing masks, and social distancing is still at some level effective, but less. And like I said, I would not mind if I think social distancing is generally a good thing. Like people deserve our privacy.
I generally think so too.
Germs, and like I remember, people always used to cough all over me. And
I think that's a good thing too. I've never been comfortable like with tight crowds, and I don't think we need to go back to handshakes. To me, there's some benefit to protecting yourself from all sorts of germs. However, I think that in my neck of the woods, which is Boston, it's kind of a mixed thing. I see people without the mask in the store. I've seen clerks in the store without the mask. I've seen people in the restaurants without the mask. But I've also seen people still walking around with double masks outside alone. I think it has a lot to do with the individual's comfort level.
The store policy means they no longer
but most stores are
enforcing.
That's right. In Massachusetts, there's no more.
Some stores do still have the policy.
Some stores do. Most stores say it's optional, and they suggest that if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear it. Of course, they can't ask that and shouldn't ask that because that's a personal question. But most businesses in Massachusetts have made it optional. I haven't seen anyone that still absolutely mandates it. I think that for good reason, places like hospitals and nursing homes mandate it and should. But most regular businesses that are open to the public are not at this point. And I would say that they're coming down, the masks, that is. And I see less of it as time goes on and as people feel more confident. My own personal doctor at Mass General Hospital, who tends to think like I think, has said that she thinks that there's going to be a group of people, including her patients, who are never going to take off the mask and who are never going to fully emerge into society. They're always going to be, for the rest of their lives, going to be in a state of semi-isolation. And I think that unless you have a serious pre-existing condition, or you're over 80, then it seems to me that's more psychological and maybe political than it is scientific. That's my opinion.
I mean, people should probably follow local case count numbers. So if you have comorbidities, even if you're fully vaccinated and the case count and infection rate is quite low, you're
Exactly.
probably still keep social distance. But if the case count starts going up, we'll probably go back to mask. And we got 10 minutes left. We should talk about the G7 and Putin, Biden. And I would say that Putin probably won on almost all accounts, even though the U.S. media is trying to somehow portray it like Biden having the upper hand.
Biden, obviously. I mean, look, I don't know. I don't want us to get in trouble with YouTube, but to me, it's obvious that he is dealing with an increasing level of dementia. He is, dementia is, and I can speak to this. My father had dementia. It is a progressive disease. It doesn't get better. It gradually gets worse and worse. And he does seem to be in intermediate stages of it at this point in his life. I think everyone knew that. In a way, I suppose.
President Trump was on Fox News yesterday with Hannity. He said it's not age. He was saying there is a sizable, 10-20% of elderly people who get dementia.
It's
not like dementia comes with age.
No, not necessarily.
Of people who are elderly that get dementia.
And there are many elderly who don't. In fact, I think most don't, but I think he does. And, I suppose it's sort of like Naftali Bennett, to bring things back to Israel. He's not popular. Most people don't think he is fit to be prime minister, but they put him in there because they wanted to defeat Netanyahu. Need I say more? Anyway, Dooovid, I want to kind of wrap it up because I want to make sure that the show will download properly to Rumble and Gab and Minds and BitChute and all of these other people that carry the show now, but they tend to get finicky if I go on too long, and it doesn't download. So share your thoughts. What are you up to in terms of broadcasting these days? What do you have coming up?
I'm interviewing actually later this afternoon a local senior Hare Krishna disciple who actually ran for Congress. Like, he tried to run even against Gary Peters for Senate, but he wasn't successful. An interesting character. He's a professor of writing, but he's been he became Hare Krishna decades ago, and he is the one who convinced me to become a vegetarian when I went to the local ISKCON temple. He was one of the first people I spoke to, and we had tens of hours of conversations, mostly about the ethics of meat eating. So I'm going to be talking to, and we're part of, I included him. I was part of a local interfaith organization with actually a female rabbi in Detroit, and I ended up being able to include him in it. And then he became pretty prominent in interfaith, and he's in Lansing, the capital of Michigan. Mm-hmm. And he started his own interfaith network there. So I'm going to interview him on my channel in an hour at 3 about interfaith and cow protection, as he advocates for not necessarily forcing everybody to be vegetarian, but just generally the ethics or ideals behind vegetarianism or why. And honestly, when I became vegetarian, they really convinced me that it's probably not such a good idea to kill the cow. And a lot of rabbis agree with me, saying that, and I agree that Judaism has specific protections uniquely for the cow, because the cow is a benevolent animal
protections,
that gives its milk to us and asks nothing in return. So kosher says you just can't eat milk and meat together out of some respect for the cow. But the current state of mass slaughter, and we know in Europe, most Jews rarely had beef or meat.
Well, most people do.
At most, even the Talmud talks about it.
Sure, most people did.
Just having meat.
We have much more that today than
as
ever.
Opposed to your average poor person eats beef 2 or 3 times. You could be homeless and poor and still eat beef 2 or 3 times a day.
That's right, because of McDonald's.
I'm largely in agreement about being against industrial slaughter.
I am too. And I'm having on a Catholic priest who's just written a book about his own experiences with exorcism and the existence of demons in the world and their possession of people and how he's seen this.
Dybbuk in Hebrew.
Yeah, and it's something that
Jews or the sages.
It's something that I have to tell you. Yeah, and I have to tell you that I personally never really thought much about this until maybe in recent years, when I've started to think I'm having some things going on. I'll be getting into that with the priest. And,
are you going crazy, or is it
Or
that
is
there's
something
these
happening
spirits
here?
around, and if
Yeah.
you weren't careful, I mean, in fact, I've been plugging your book sometimes in conversations related
Thank
to
you.
topics about the nature of hatred or the nature of evil. In New Zealand, there's a debate on the nature of evil, and I had a debate on the nature of hatred, and like we discussed that with your book. Is it this
Thank you.
added element that causes it? And you say, like, is it that we don't fight the Yetzer Hara, we don't fight the evil inclination, and these spirits that are always there, therefore enter it in a certain
Yes.
way that there's like people are naturally good, and it's not that people do bad things, it's that people don't protect ourselves against these spirits entering us.
Against
and
these
the spirits
influences.
enter us. And your book was just a pamphlet and
Thank
wasn't able to get into these metaphysical topics, but I'll definitely be looking forward to that. And
Thank
I
you.
did mention your book a
Thank
few
you.
times over the last few
I
weeks.
appreciate that. My book
It's an
is
important topic to understand, like
Yeah.
what causes not just other people that you disagree with to do bad things, what causes me myself to do bad things and act in a different way. And if you're saying, well, maybe it's spirits, maybe
well, that's the question. I'm starting to really actually have some things that make me think it is, and I'll get into that in my interview. And by the way, thank you for mentioning my book, The Satanic
traditionally, it's
Conspiracy.
like that's maybe what Jews
Yeah.
believed, even metaphysically.
I think
what does
all-
it mean,
all
the
people-
Yetzer Hara? Is the Yetzer Hara you, or is the Yetzer Hara an element that causes you to do bad things?
No,
It's
yeah.
not an
And I
essence
think-
you.
I think
Obviously, if
every-
the body and limbs do bad things, it's us that did it. But was the cause of it me, or was the cause this
Well, it's a
exterior
combination.
element that?
And I think every
very
religion in the
valid for
world deals with this question, always has, and it doesn't absolve the individual of allowing something, an evil influence, not only to take over them, but then manifest itself in them. That is part of free will. So it's not like I'm saying you're free and clear because this isn't you do something evil and it's something outside. It's
Even
you.
if the rabbi says 100% it was evil spirit that entered the person.
Yeah, but who
do it, he
left the
still
evil?
is legally
Yeah, he is
accountable,
legally
for
and
the
morally.
action, and that's not.
No,
it might be less like the intent. Just the person who did a
it's
crime
no.
with intent
Ultimately,
has
the
more
individual.
punishment than someone who did a crime without intent.
No. The individual ultimately is responsible because it's the individual who allows that evil spirit to the degree it happens.
Well, God
into
forbid
their
that. What
life.
about the case in France? Like you say, with that, I mean, the Jewish community is a big concern that guy who, smoking marijuana or said spirits, that the French court let him off for, God forbid, killing that elderly Jewish woman.
And that was wrong.
They-
He
'cause they
let
said it was a spirit that
He's
entered him.
responsible for his crime, and he let that spirit in. However, it happened. Anyway, Dooovid. So we'll talk next week. And as always, I want to thank you for joining me.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot.
All right. Take care.